Good morning. Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Kolpak.
Here.
Pepcorn.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Strand. Mahoney.
Here. This is to announce that the Commission will meet in executive session for the purpose of attorney consultation regarding reasonable, predictable, and threatened litigation by romantics, and to discuss negotiating strategy and provide negotiating instructions to its attorney or other negotiator regarding the reasonable, predictable, and threatened litigation, and to receive the attorney's advice and guidance in legal risks, strengths, and weaknesses in action of a public entity, which is to discuss these matters. An open meeting would have a negative fiscal effect on the bargaining and or litigation position of the city. Therefore, the executive session in this matter is authorized pursuant to North Dakota Century Code 4404 19.1 subsections 2, 5, and 9. May it be moved by the Commissioners to meet in executive session in Red River Room at this time. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We will move to executive session in Red River Room and come back later and adjourn. Thank you. We come back from our executive session, and just to clarify the record, Commissioner Strand did attend the executive session at this time, and it should be noted down in roll call that he joined us at the start of our executive session upstairs in Red River Room. We met in the executive session. There is no action to report or motion to do at this time, so can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Now we get to go to our learning session. Jeremy, did I catch you off guard?
Well, not very often I break up a city commission meeting to do a informative brown bag for you folks. So I don't know if we do have lunches for you. I don't know if you want to take 5 and grab a lunch. And then we can get into it. Then we might as well get started. This will be an action-packed hour. Probably a little less action-packed than the last hour of your life, but we are here to talk about the 2nd Street pedestrian bridge right outside City Hall here to connect downtown to the Greenway. I'll do a brief intro and then I'll hand it over to our consultant team. 3 of you have already seen quite a bit of this, so Commissioner Strand, Commissioner Kolpak, this may be new to you, so a lot of good information. Just a quick background, we applied for federal aid under the North Dakota's Urban Grant Program for this project. We were awarded it last year, $2.4 million federal with our local match of $600,000 at a bare minimum. We quickly did an RFP to select a consultant team to do this project for us, so we selected KLJ with the sub-consultant Michael Baker, who does bridges nationally and internationally. Scott's going to go through more of the details, but we've probably been at this 6 to 8 months. We've had a number of internal meetings, a number of study review committee meetings. So we're at a point where we want to update you guys on what we're up to, what we found, maybe get some decisions from you, and then move forward. The goal is to have a decision on a design, hopefully in the next 6 months, and then be bidding this project in about 14 months from today. So with that, I'll hand it over to Scott Maddah. He's with KLJ Engineering in West Fargo.
Thanks, Jeremy. Like Jeremy said, this is kind of just an update on where we are and just looking at a recommendation. We're proposing to move forward with this project for the 2nd Street pedestrian bridge that will connect the Civic Plaza and downtown with the Red River Greenway on the Fargo side of the river. I want to start by just introducing our project team. As Jeremy said, I'm Scott Maddah with KLJ. We're the lead consultant on this. I'm the project manager. With me today is Wade Klein with KLJ. He is leading our public involvement. People not with us today, but on our team are Joe Burgum with Folkways. He has been hired by us to help with the public engagement part of this project. And then with Michael Baker, we have Kevin Anderson, Daniel Baxter, and John Fennell. Kevin and Daniel are leading the structural design, with John Fennell leading all the landscape architecture services for the project. So as we've gone through this project, we kind of stepped through this as kind of a 2-tier system, as 2 different groups that we have to run through this project. We have our project management team, which is really it's city staff and our consultant team. And with that, that team focuses on the technical aspects of the project, you know, what we're required to meet, the more the nitty gritty, some of the fine details. From there, we have our steering committee, which consists of the group in front of you. It's different city staff, it's elected officials, Fargo Dome, library, you know, things like that, that we present to as kind of our green light before we take anything to the public. Make sure they don't see any red flags, things like that, keeping them abreast of what's going on and with the process to make sure they're in agreement with all the steps we're taking. So with that,
Yeah. Little wardrobe malfunction there, never mind, just a little icebreaker. Yeah, Wade Klein with KLJ. As Jeremy mentioned on the front end, we really do need to get to a project that we can bid the fall of 2023. So as far as, sort of, planning and engineering a project, we've got to be a little bit expeditious here over the next several months. I think for the commission's benefit, a little bit of background on where we're at as far as process. We did kick this project off in December of 2021. As Scott mentioned, we have a steering committee that we're working with. Both Commissioner Preston and Commissioner Pepcorn are a part of that. We've met with that group 3 times over the past several months, trying to, number one, create some awareness of what the project is, what the background is, start to develop some concepts, and Scott will talk a little bit about that. In May, under direction of the steering committee, we did pull together some stakeholder meetings. I'll talk about, who we engaged, what we heard. Last steering committee meeting we had the end of, or actually early August, and now we're at a point where we want to kind of come out and get some commission guidance so that really by the time we get into fall, probably late September, October, we want to start doing a little bit of public information. We feel there's some components here that the public needs to get engaged with so that as we get into the fall, winter 2022 into 2023, we can work through the required federal permitting process that Scott will talk a little bit about. So again, as we work into 2023, we can have a project that's going to be ready to bid and build.
thanks, Wade. We also want to just kind of step back through some of the history, and Nicole can cover that just to lay the groundwork.
Yeah, the consultants asked that I kick off the discussion of like, how did we get here? Why are we doing a bridge across to orient everybody? And early in 2002, as part of a riverfront development plan, we really saw the Second Avenue corridor link Broadway to the river. And we've, it showed up again in 2012 and in 2015 in our Go 2030 plan, as well as an updated downtown plan in 2018. So basically, we've been studying our downtown area in many different times, and to the point where I kind of joke with consultants, if I get one more study that tells me celebrate the river, I'm gonna, kind of get a little frustrated here. So I think it's about connecting to the river is our goal, and we have many plans that lead us there. There's some really great renderings and graphics that held on to that vision in both Go 2030, the In-Focus plan, and the 2002 plan. And so they're not here in this slide, but you can find these links to these studies on our websites.
Thanks, Nicole. So as Jeremy mentioned, there was $2.6 million worth of, or I'm sorry, $2.4 million worth of grant money received with a $600,000 local match. So there's around $3 million allocated to the project right now. And with that funding, that's allocated through North Dakota Department of Transportation. And so with that, we need to follow NEPA compliance with that money to make sure we're meeting all the federal guidelines. So under that, we need to complete what's called a categorical exclusion. So that's an environmental document that outlines engineering issues, environmental issues, things like that, what we're impacting with the environment, what we're not, looking at different alternatives, and essentially comes down to a decision document that you as the commissioners will sign off on. Part of that also is to solicit input from stakeholders. That's, like I said, Park District, that could be Corps of Engineers, a bunch of different entities that are standard lists that we send out. And then also we need public involvement with the project as well. And again, Wade mentioned that, so that's where we're heading to go to next. But ultimately, we compile that document, That outlines a preferred alternative, and then that document goes to the North Dakota DOT for review and signature, and then also to Federal Highway for review and signature. And again, that's just to make sure that we're in compliance with NEPA with the money we're using for the project. So with the environmental document, what we've done to date, we've done the environmental field studies. So we've went out and we've delineated all the wetlands in the area. We've also done a cultural survey. So we pulled all the records for the history in this area, and there is one cultural site that I can get into in a little bit. We've also completed some of the preliminary alternative development, and I'll get into that later as well. We've completed the topographic survey, and then as Wade mentioned, we did reach out to stakeholders, a key group, to kind of get some input from them on the process. We're going through and get their opinion on the project. What needs to be done to complete that environmental document is we are focusing on a bridge alignment. That's probably our key component from this meeting, is to get your input on that, is because we want to look on the east side of the flood wall. We're within the floodplain and the floodway. And so with that, we need to determine how that bridge is going to affect the river hydraulics. We ultimately want a no rise on the Red River. And so with that, we need to look at how the bridge depth, thickness, the pier locations, things like that interact with those hydraulics to find out if we have a rise. If we do have a rise, we need to look at mitigation options to displace that river rise. So that's the first thing we're looking at. The next is the grading in the Civic Plaza, how that west end of the project is going to tie down with the existing conditions out there, or if we're going to bring fill in, things like that. As I mentioned, we did a cultural survey, and there is one cultural site from pretty long ago that the State Historical Preservation Office would like to know more information on how we're going to impact that site, whether there's going to be any excavation there, if there's going to be any fill put, if there's going to be any bridge piers, things like that. So we need to determine if we would be impacting that site as well before we can move on with CADX. And then I also mentioned the public involvement. We need to loop the public in, get their input on the project to ultimately complete all the items needed for the categorical exclusion. Keep in mind that, again, we're focusing on the alignment. Items such as the type of bridge, the color, any railings, what the piers look like, if we use a form liner to make it look like stone or brick, those aren't decisions that we need now. Those decisions will be made as we continue through the process. At our first steering committee meeting, we just had some pictures of different pedestrian bridges throughout the world. And this is one that really resonated well with our steering committee. This is the Bicycle Snake Bridge in Copenhagen. It's a relatively simple bridge, but has a very iconic feel to it. I mean, the color of that deck, how you can see kind of the backbone of the bridge from underneath. And so we use this as some inspiration as well as the river. A lot of the studies that Nicole mentioned is let's celebrate the river. So as our landscape architecture team started to look at different alignments, they used something like this and then inspiration from the river as well. And I just want to walk through kind of how we started to develop all these alternatives. Every one of these just started as a sketch on a piece of paper. It was just, what our inspiration was, what our constraints were, where do we need to connect to? And so we just literally sketched out on a piece of paper, different alignment options. From there, trying to dive more into the feasibility, we created very, very rough 3D views of it that we could drop into Google Earth and look at the alternatives from different angles. And this is, again, where we engaged the project management team and started to look at, what are our constraints out there? For example, we need to use 17 feet of clearance between the bottom of the bridge and 2nd Street. We also know that we need to get an ambulance that drives along that bike path on the east side of the bridge from the Sandbagger Memorial all the way up to Oak Grove. So we need to look at those items. We also talked with Public Works about that lift station right there, what equipment they need to get. And then there's an outfall that goes to the river. And so that's one thing you'll notice is kind of how this is configured. This east or north-south connection ties in up here next to that lift station. Well, looking at that with feasibility, as we took it to the next step, we moved that connection further south because we knew, we didn't want to impact that outfall. If equipment ever needs to get there for maintenance, we didn't want this bridge to be in the way. And so then this was our next step, as we looked at actually developing an alignment that made sure we meet our curve radius requirements for pedestrians. We looked at, again, the vertical clearance to make sure we're meeting that over 2nd Street. Our vertical profile grades need to meet ADA requirements. And so again, just making sure we meet the feasibility for all these alternatives so we don't present something that can't be built in the future. From there, once we got through all that, this is where we started to create renderings to visualize what the bridge could look like. And I emphasize could because, again, we're just looking at the alignment. The railing, the bridge color, the pier locations, the type of piers, those are all still up in the air. We can change those. Those are decisions we can make at a later date. But we're just trying to show, as we looked at this, people are going to want to see what the bridge could look like. So we needed to kind of put that whole package together. So in the end, we came up with 6 concepts that are shown on your screen. And these are what we took to the stakeholder meeting that Wade will talk about in the end. But all of these concepts followed the same process that I just went through. So once we got our concepts together, we looked at what this project could potentially cost. And so what we started to look at is pedestrian bridges throughout the US that have been constructed, and we determined the cost of the construction and the area of that bridge deck to determine a cost per square foot for each type of bridge. And so those costs range from, you can see the simpler, the pre-stressed eye girder from roughly $400 a square foot all the way up to $600 a square foot. So based on that, we averaged all those costs, and with the length and width of the alternatives we've developed, we put together rough cost estimates on what each concept would cost to construct. These prices, I do want to say, have a 25% contingency built in. And we did that just with lately, bid prices have been going up pretty quick. There's material shortage, labor shortage. There's a lot of work going on in this area, so there's a contractor shortage as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were trying to ballpark these prices as best as possible as we move forward. With that, I'll hand it over to Wade.
Thanks, Scott. So I think as the commission can see,
Could we just go back one slide?
Absolutely.
So when you have these cost estimates, in the previous slide, you showed structural steel, a variety of different things. What materials is it all the same materials on this? And if you go to the previous slide, which one is it? $551, $590, which one are you using?
So since we don't know what type of bridge we're using yet, we average these prices, what turns out to be about a $503 square
So
foot.
503 on the next slide.
Correct. So we use the
Okay.
bridge areas times that 503.
So I think as the commission can see, quite a bit of context has gone into, where we were at in the process as we sort of got to the end of spring, early summer in terms of, what kind of context are we trying to fit? What are some concepts that would fit that context? The direction that we had as far as putting together an overall public engagement plan was to make sure that we were engaging different groups, parts of the community, to make sure that we could gather some, I think the term I would use is sentiment as far as how different features of that bridge could actually look and feel and really fit that context. So the list you'll see on the screen are groups that we reached out to try to make sure that we were getting a broad set of groups. And we really broke those down into 5 categories. Number one, sort of neighbors in the neighborhood. So, reaching out to, the Downtown Neighborhood Association. Arts and culture was a big component, reaching out to the Arts Partnership, the Arts and Culture Commission, tourism and those kinds of groups, reaching out to Charlie and the CVB, making sure that, kind of looking at it from the perspective of a visitor, what do people want from that perspective. Youth and education, so making sure we're reaching out to the school district and those kinds of groups, and then also reaching out with some growth and development groups, developers, other folks who have certainly a private sector interest in the downtown community. So we held a series of focus groups in May to try to gather some feedback, I think, on some sentiment related to a future potential connection. And so some of the things that we asked about, and we showed specific images, we asked the group about, how do you feel about sort of an above deck structure? And when I say that, I mean, something like a suspension bridge, you think Golden Gate Bridge, how do they feel about like a river outlook? Do they want a wide gathering space? Something that we really spent some time thinking about, considering the amount of investment that was put into City Hall, is, how important is it that if we build a bridge, make that connection from downtown to the Greenway, how do we what is our concern with sort of preserving views to City Hall? I mean, you've got the nice mural on the outside. So what you see here generally is where folks were rating from most important to least important, things like an above deck structure, river outlook, widened gathering spaces. And you'll see that idea of, preserving, City Hall views maybe is not as significant as we might otherwise think. And in fact, if you look at some of the concepts that have been developed, it may actually improve, your visibility as a pedestrian or a cyclist as you're out and about, maybe getting a closer look, a closer view of, some of the art and other things that are on City Hall. So, we gathered some feedback from the stakeholders on what their sentiment was as far as some elements to interact with the surroundings. The river outlook was very popular. I think that's something that could be a real fun feature. We did add one of those outlooks. Remember, with the Main Avenue Bridge, that little cutout that's on the Main Avenue Bridge wasn't originally supposed to be there. That was an add-on, and I think we found that that's been a nice opportunity, gathering space for the community. Allows you to sort of step out of the pedestrian area, look at the river. Those kinds of things. The above deck structure, it's something that, can be sort of a faux element. It doesn't necessarily have to be a structural component either, but it certainly adds to sort of that viewscape. And the idea of some gathering spaces. You want to have maybe an area for somebody to take a seat, or maybe a few people to sort of mingle, or whatever that may be. So we wanted to make sure that we're trying to get some sentiment from folks on some of those features that could be potentially built into the bridge itself. We presented the 6 alignments, or the 6 concepts that we discussed earlier to the stakeholders, and we did it in 2 different ways. So the solid blue line represents when folks were sort of asked to sort of rate among the 6 from most desirable to least desirable. And when you look at that, I mean, you don't see a significant delta there. I mean, 1 and 5 and 6 kind of stand out, 3 as well. But then the thin blue line was sort of the end of the game exercise, where we kind of sort of did a Mr. Potato Head exercise, where we basically said, why don't you pick the elements that you would like to put on this bridge? And when we did that, I think it puts the sentiment into perspective a little bit, in terms of folks really starting to sort of glom onto concept 1 and concept 3 in terms of what they sort of envisioned as maybe a more ideal sort of as Scott would say, sort of an alignment for this future potential improvement that would connect downtown to the Greenway. So that was a key component that we looked at, as well as a number of sort of criteria. Anytime we develop this kind of a transportation investment, one of the things that we like to do is come up with some criteria where we may go back at the end of the process before we make a selection and say, how do we want to rank and prioritize some of these concepts or these alignments? So we ask people to rank aesthetics, bike and ped mobility, safety and security, environmental sustainability, operations and maintenance, kind of those Ben-Dow issues, gathering spaces and cost. So you can see, overall, folks were very interested in what this thing looks like. I think that's something that the steering committee, including the commissioners who are involved in that, were very interested in. Like, let's make sure that this is something memorable. The bike ped mobility is very important. I mean, we're talking about a new connection here down to the Greenway, so we want to make sure that it's comfortable, it provides mobility, and safety and security was something we heard a lot about. I mean, this could be, a very big piece of infrastructure, so we want to make sure people feel safe using it. So those are really the top 3. You'll see the gathering spaces, or something that came down a little bit lower. Cost came down a little bit lower in terms of overall importance. So we felt like these were important from a quantitative and a qualitative perspective to try to understand, what do some of our key stakeholders feel are important. And I think a lot of this, I would say, even this element and this element, I think aligned pretty closely, with our key technical staff that we worked with from planning and engineering as well. So we felt like we were kind of starting to sort of triangulate a bit of a direction. And, when we talk about aesthetics, I think some of the buzzwords, sleek, modern, Scott talked about that Precedent image, that was something I think the committee glommed onto right away as, hey, let's do something neat here. Let's do something memorable, something iconic. And, potentially, the above the deck structure can be expensive, but there are some things we can do to integrate some sort of faux structural elements that allow that bridge to look pretty cool. And then, one of the stakeholders we had, of course, was, the great Mark Peel. I don't think anybody knows our communities in the river as well as Mark does, and he sees it just a tremendous opportunity here for us to look at this and, integrate some interpretive pieces. Obviously, the river is why we're here. So, certainly some real opportunities there as we start to move further into the process. I kind of touched on the mobility pieces. This is a key connection. Folks were interested in making sure from a sentiment element that this isn't something where, if you are riding a bike, you're going to have to stop and get off and walk it. That's not the point of this at all. So mobility will be really important. And I think that piece is kind of the all ages and all abilities as well. We want to make sure that all elements of our community have an opportunity to access this infrastructure as well. Cost, again, from a stakeholder perspective, ranked lower on the piece, but again, I think some of the things from a sentiment perspective, that overlook idea, the gathering spaces, creating something that's visible, sort of that eyes on the street. We don't want to create a lot of dead spaces, and the opportunities, I think, particularly from some of the landscape architects, some of the art community that was involved, Dana DeVal and some of that group who are very talkative, had a lot of really good opportunities of how, this can really infill and integrate with public art. And we don't have to make decisions on what kind of art and where the art will be, but, making sure we're leaving ourselves a quote unquote canvas for doing that. And I think the sustainability piece is big too. Christine from Riverkeepers was there. We made sure we talked about, trees and buffers and how that component fits in too. And there's an educational component. I mean, this is an opportunity for kids, to come down, experience the river from a different perspective. So it seems like a real opportunity to sort of, bring in a range of different interest groups to make sure that this is not only an iconic mobility connection, but it also provides an idea to teach stewardship as well. So that was really kind of the overall sentiment. So I think as I wrap up my points, I think where we're coming down to as a consultant and a technical group is we feel pretty comfortable with trying to get to a recommendation of trying to move forward in that process that we're in, which is really just the environmental document phase of trying to narrow this down to a concept 1 and a 3 and start to move a little bit further into understanding the more specific design features of those, including gathering some additional public engagement in this overall process.
Thanks, Wade. So with that, Wade kind of summarized it. That's our recommendation for next steps, is to have you guys weigh in on our recommendation of narrowing the alternatives we've developed from 6 down to 2. From there, we can go to the public, engage them, get their opinions. And again, I want to stress that the renderings you see on the screen, or just looking at the alignment, the colors, the bridge type, that is still decisions to come. But we needed something to kind of display how these bridges could look moving forward. So like I said, as our next steps, update you all on our progress, get some guidance on the next steps, and then from there, discuss project budget. How would this bridge get funded? Where's the money coming from? And then go to the public, update them on the project, and ultimately, start to wrap up that environmental document. From there, we can open it up to any questions.
I know Commissioner Preston and Commissioner Pepcorn were on this task force to look at it. Do you have any comments?
Sure. If you could show that first slide where it shows the Snake Bridge, if you wouldn't mind doing that. I'm very excited about it. I think it's a kind of a fun opportunity. Obviously, a pedestrian bridge isn't as expensive as a regular, a vehicle carrying bridge. And so I think it can actually be artwork. To me, it's at very least be visually interesting. And to me, that's what I'm excited about. And I would like to say it's also, a connection to the river, but I believe the Greenway 25 or 50 years from now, the Greenway will be as popular for the multiple uses as anything we have. That might be the most valuable thing. I mean, people, it's a 30 mile connection. There might be people that they bike it or walk it or something. It might be who knows what'll happen. I'm very excited about that. So it's been very fun. I'm glad I'm a part of it. And I would say, so if we wanted to build the cheapest, we could just build what we always build with our bridges, a cement, straight thing. But to me, this is an opportunity to build something that's iconic, hopefully, and visually interesting. You want it to be complementary to our new city hall and the library, so they all go together. But to me, I love this picture because at our first meeting, when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's what caught my eye. And I like the curviness because that obviously ties into our river. And so I kind of like that. So I'm looking, and obviously this is just one step in the journey, but I think it's kind of a fun thing to be a part of. And so that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Preston.
Yeah, I just want to add my enthusiasm for this whole project. And if I could just make one comment about when we look at the final design and how much it might cost. If we're going to do just a plain old pedestrian bridge that is cement and nothing else to it, I would say let's not do it at all. Because this is truly more of a piece, and it's kind of an artful piece. It's also got a useful aspect to it, but it should be part of the whole branding for downtown. So I would hope that we would not be short-sighted on the ultimate design because of cost.
Commissioners, have any comments or questions? Commissioner Strand.
Jeremy, could you go back to some images that tell us where it's going to land on the other side, on the east end, just to see where that is, and then I'd like to have some conversation. Something that shows a little more. There was one that showed the river actually and the Moorhead bike path across the other side of the river.
Maybe the early sketch.
All up here. We talking this one here?
Well, that's not quite. There was an image where you could actually see the trees on the east side of the river and the Moorhead bike path curving around.
Slide 11,
That
try
one?
11.
That's
Got
not,
it, John?
No, not quite. But
The next
you
one.
can keep.
I think it's the next one.
This one?
There you go.
Okay.
Here's one of my questions. Well, obviously, this is landing in a North Dakota side. It's a North Dakota us-owned only bridge. But was there any exploration of crossing the river to meet up with that bike path on the other side of the river? Was that considered at all?
So we did get some of that feedback during our stakeholder engagement of just asking why it's not crossing the river. I guess it hasn't been planned. We did reach out to the city of Moorhead and ask them, if they had any plans to do it. And the comment we got is, it'd be a great connection, but there hasn't been any planning for it, and there's no funding mechanism on their side to pay for it. And so going forward, we could look at how that could be accommodated potentially in the future.
I'd be curious what the impact of the results would be if it landed over there versus on this side. And we have a bridge that's crossing over to the Greenway that's connecting with a bike path that, at last I recall, that bike path closes at dusk. Technically, because we had an incident by the dam a few years back where somebody went on a bicycle down and hit the railings, and was very clear to the public, they're not supposed to be on those bike paths after dusk. So I'm concerned about access and use for people when, if we're building a $10 million facility, I hope that's accessible 24/7.
Jeremy, our bike paths don't shut down.
Well, in theory, this is Park District property on the riverside, so there would be no lighting.
But you can get
You can
into it.
use
right?
it, yeah. It's not really a park per se. They can use it, but it's not lit.
And it's technically not open to the public after, like even Island Park, you cannot technically legally go through that bike path after 10. And as I recall, it's just a talking point. If we're going to build a bike path or a facility to connect to bike paths, let's make sure they're really usable to the people and not cut off and not arbitrary, like at dusk you can't be there. That's one concern I have. I'd like to know if, crossing the river, if we ever could explore it. Again, I wasn't in these discussions, so bear with me, but if ever Moorhead and we could partner and come up with a greater vision to land over on the other side, I'd like to know what that would look like, and if ever there would be a partnership.
To be honest on that, John, on the Roars development project of the mall next door in Moorhead, one of the discussion points was a bridge across, and one is either at this location or actually in the Mid-America Steel location. And that was a discussion in the Moorhead community, so you're not off on that.
So the issue of closing at nights, and again, there's different jurisdictions that run as I understand it, the bike paths along the river are not publicly accessible all night long, legally. So that's a point of information for us to gather and see if there's ways we can address that. What's the cultural site?
It's from a brothel back in the early 1900s, I believe.
That's in our parking lot, isn't it?
It's somewhere right in this area here. So.
I thought
John,
they
don't you remember
excavated
that?
that.
We found some whiskey bottles from it.
Well,
when
yeah,
were
they
digging?
excavated that, and I thought they pulled out the remains when they did the development of City Hall.
And I did ask about that, and I guess this one has not been further evaluated. It's been identified. And so that's the discussion we're getting back from the DOT and SHPO.
Okay. Last question, for the sake of exploration and thinking out loud, did anybody ever pull up and look at the cultural bridge? The concept, and see if there's any ideas from that could be incorporated into our project?
That's what Mark had talked about.
Oh, that's the one from is that the 70s?
The graves, I believe.
Yeah.
It's in the Smithsonian.
Yeah, so that was brought up during the stakeholder engagement, and that one actually does go over the river. And yeah, that was something, I mean, we could take features from that. That one had a lot of steps. It was more flat areas and then would raise up. We wanted to make sure, we were looking for more free
I'm just
flowing.
more thinking concept and use and creativity, out of the box thinking of things that might work into this approach.
And yeah, so we do plan on, once we kind of get to the next steps of this, trying to incorporate, if it's the colors or any themes from that we could take away and incorporate into the structure.
And my last question is, where does it engage and begin near the Civic Center? Yeah, on the west end, where would this start?
So right now, these alignments show that we'd be tying down to existing ground somewhere in here. It is our plan, once we determine, what alignments we're looking at, is to, look at how this site would be changed. It's assumed that there'd be a lot of fill brought in to kind of raise where that bridge lands to more closely align with the elevation of the main entrance of City Hall.
So the sooner we know the future of the Civic location in the parking lot, the more we're all on the same page.
There's a lot of moving pieces with,
Well, there's two parts of that. If you just raise the plaza, John, if you just do that where our winding road is, you can raise that up to the level of the Civic Center all the way across, which makes it different on this bridge as far as elevation, how far the bridge has to come up from where you take off from it. So we do have some money that we've placed in the plaza redevelopment to that. Commissioner Kolpak.
Thank you. This was really helpful. First time I'm seeing this information. I just wanted to say I appreciate the upfront thinking around including local art as part of this project, and I'm not doing an after the fact consideration there. So thank you.
Anything else, Jeremy? This will be one of the first presentations you got finished on time. Is it anything else you want to say?
Well, it's because Wade gets paid words per minute, and he
Oh, I see.
keeps us on task here.
Mayor, if we could, help if there's a $3 million upfront dollar amount and it's a $2.4 million grant and a $600,000 local match, yet the project could conceivably cost $10 to $12 million, how would this get budgeted?
Is that a Brenda question?
We need to ask that.
CIP, prairie dog funds, manna from heaven. How are we going to do this one? Oh, Mike's up here too. This is a big, serious question. Now, here we go.
Serious today.
That's right.
So I think what we're trying to do, engineering's trying to think outside the box and look at what should we have, right? And then we can go back, we can go to the drawing board and talk to finance, and are there other options of funding structures like this that maybe we haven't typically used in the past? We do have prairie dog funds coming, but we are looking at maintenance and infrastructure needs also for that. But are there other tools in our toolbox we have not used in the past that we need to start looking at?
And I would just add, thank you for the question, Commissioner. I think it's a great question because you're right and we appreciate your conversation here today as well. So thank you. Let's just step back on that. This is really very clear consensus about building to this level and not down here, right, at a $2 million or $3 million bridge. So I think that's helpful. But the other piece we're going to certainly talk about is bonding. We would talk about our riverfront TIF. We talk about other sources of revenue to try gap this. To make sure that we're giving you that kind of infrastructure that is that thing we're going to be proud about, 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road. And I think the commissioners noted it well, that this is kind of a one-shot opportunity to do just that and to do it right. So we will certainly meet you at that challenge and that goal, and we'll go back and talk about the finances. So appreciate the question, though. More work to be done.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Preston?
So I don't know if you're looking for some feedback on those two concepts that seem to be floating to the top. It's difficult to know by the illustrations, and I don't know if you can get to those slides, whether there is a river outlook on the one that's placed further back. So concept one. It's difficult to see what kind of outlook or what kind of view that would be on the river, but that would just be one of the pieces of feedback I would have there. The more we could bring that out towards the river, I think would
And
be
so,
good.
this one we looked at this was originally developed to try and mitigate any of those impacts with removing trees, things like that, staying away from the river. We could look at possibly swinging this closer to the river. There is a natural clearing in the trees right around this area here that, it'd be
Or
bring it
even
back.
just bulging out that piece.
Exactly, right there. We just widen it out a little bit, and that could serve as the gathering spot and an outlook for that as well.
So if I could address Commissioner Strand, we didn't really talk about your first question, I think. If you look at the riverside here, we talked about the Moorhead connection, but there are some differences here in how close this bridge is to the river. If you look at concept one, it's pretty hugged up to that flood wall. If you look at concept 3, 4, and 5, 3 and 5 especially, you're very close to the water's edge under the normal water level. So an overlook under those situations, you would be right at the water's edge. I will say, so down there now, we've got dueling paths. You got a path that goes up to the lift station, and you got the secondary path that goes closer to the river. Looks like the one closer to the river would go away under all these options. So you'd still have the at-grade one today right behind the wall, and then you would have our bridge entrance basically where the eastern path is today.
It almost looks like concept 5 would put you close to the river, as close as you could get with an observation area that Commissioner Preston's talking about, and would give you that iconic being down by the river, doesn't it?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. The one thing that isn't illustrated out here is that there are trees there. None of these graphics show where the trees are. So concept 5 and 3 most likely would be removing some trees. We'd have to do more in-depth analysis of that.
Can I ask
Question.
another question about erosion on the river right there? Red River, so infamous for that, I guess. Is there a history of erosion there?
Not anymore, any less than
Okay.
typical area. Where Second Street used to be closer to the river, the river or the road was falling in, but we've moved the entire road away.
Okay.
So my answer would be not anymore, any less than typical. And the Commissioner's saying you also talked about street lighting up the path north and south of here. That's a great idea. I've thought it would be great to work with the Park District and get street lights I mean, the challenge would be keeping them above the floodwaters, but I think you could with wooden poles, all the way from Linwood, all the way along the river, all the way through here, and even up to Oak Grove or even points north of Oak Grove. But that would be its own separate project. But for safety, security, I know police, we work with police to improve safety underneath the First Avenue North Bridge. Now there may be interest in doing that under the NP Avenue Bridge. So that's a really good idea. It would be its own project. It'd be pretty spendy, but we could do it. It can be done.
But we've heard in the neighborhood discussions oftentimes with police is lighting is extremely important. I think Commissioner Strand is right if it's a lighted path. In New York City, oftentimes their parks are very lit up and almost all night, John, that you have, so you have activities that are going on in that area. But that would be a secondary discussion on infrastructure costs, but it'd be something we'd want to consider. Built an iconic bike path and you can't use it, it's just not.
I believe it's Amsterdam and some others, but as you're exploring creative approaches there, that winding elevated walkway that's orange, there's folks out there doing bike paths that are phosphorescent, that turn blue and glow at night. They're just beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, a question I'd have as we're just vetting things, and Wade, you probably know this and through the MetroCog background, but I'd be just curious, the traffic flows, the pedestrian bicycle usage of this bike path we'd be connecting with, and times of use, and same across the river. If ever, I'd be curious because I'm wondering if, I used to use these bike paths a lot, I haven't lately, but I'm curious what the bicyclers want. The ones that are really there a lot, that live on those bike paths, and maybe you've already gotten their input.
Well, I think, I know MetroCog right now is doing a study of the Greenway. I think there will be some sentiment that comes out of that. I'm sure Fargo staff is involved in that. And I looked at the survey, and it was a really long one, so I'm guessing there'd be a lot of good information that comes out of what some of the needs are as far as lighting and usage. I know, Dan Farnsworth at MetroCog, they still do those bike counts down on the river. They've got one on the bridge down at Lindenwood. But I think as we get further along, I think we've given ourselves a good footprint here for, prioritizing pedestrian and bike mobility, so that we're not creating something that's goofy to get over where you have to dismount on your bike so you can keep going. I don't know the numbers, but I'm guessing they're going to be in the hundreds. And I know living on the river, I didn't realize I was breaking the law, particularly this time of year when I take the dog for a walk every morning, but I guess I'll need to keep that in mind. But there are a lot of people. I mean, I use the river corridor. Just this morning, I think I passed 4 or 5 people down by Lindenwood. So
Actually, I think it's park policy.
Is it? Okay.
And
It is.
they actually had an arm on the bike path down by the dike there.
Yep.
They removed that because it caused an accident, but it's park policy.
It is, it is. And I don't believe that policy has changed.
No, it probably hasn't.
So if I could discuss a little bit further, I know you wanted to get down to 2. Hate to do this to you guys, but it's kind of fun occasionally. I think we should, I'm just thinking about this out loud, but concept 4 is the shortest bridge. And concept 4 and 5 are kind of close to being in the same location. I think we should also include the shortest bridge as part of our environmental analysis.
Was 4 the least favorable in
It
the group?
is,
And
but-
why was that? Anybody know?
Well, it's straighter and maybe a little bit
Sure,
plainer looking.
sure, that
But
makes
you could
sense.
still dress that up at the end of this project. I know there are some reservations on cost, so I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't say we've had some design assumptions. We've assumed that this is going to be 14 feet wide. If that would go down to 12 feet, 1,000-foot bridge, that's $1 million savings. So I just think some of these things should be a little bit more vetted, but we're not making decisions on width and all that good stuff. We're really making decisions on alignments and where piers would get in the way in the river. So at this point, I don't think we should I think we should keep the shortest one in there as well, just for you guys to be able to see that.
I think we need a cost comparison, so that's helpful. I also would like you to look at valued engineering. You know, I think you guys have thrown out here what what a most beautiful bridge would be and all that, but if we have to look for money in CIP and we're pulling it or something else, engineer takes other projects in town. So I think in due diligence to the public, we'd like to look at, okay, let's value engineering. City Hall came in at 30 million, valued engineering came down to 22 million. You've got some concepts here that are $8, $9, $10 million. If we look at a little cheaper option, but like to Commissioner Pipcorn when he says an iconic look and stuff like that, well, maybe if you go 12 feet instead of 14 feet, maybe if you do some different ideas, see what happens if you trim it up. But at Commissioner Preston's, it's not going to be an old concrete bridge. It's going to be something iconic. So let's look like iconic, but maybe on a Chevy budget. Okay.
Mayor, I'd really strongly encourage us to go talk with Moorhead. If they knew that we were going to put $6 to $8 to $10, $12 million into a bridge and land it on our side of the river, but the option could conceivably exist to go across the river, get near the mall, City Hall, the Yomkomp Center, it'd be a really big game changer because right now, if I was wanting to get to this point, all I have to do is go up half a block south and go on to access the bike path by the Sandbagger Art. So I'm going to get to where I can get there really easily right now anyway, to the other side of the water wall. But I can't easily get over to Moorhead. Well, I guess I could cross the highway. But I'd just be curious the dynamic of that. They might really like this idea of saying, hey, let's partner on this. We'll contribute money to it. We'll broaden our span. I don't know. They may not have any interest at all.
Well, you can get across on First Avenue, John, but I think you're trying to make Moorhead attractive because if they build the big apartment complex where the mall is, now you'd have a bike path go across the river.
Right to
It'd
there.
be a great way to come to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah, we can absolutely reach out. When we talked before, we just met with engineering, so we could meet with city administration.
I know it was part of their master plan on that new mall. That was one of the concepts Mr. Roars talked to us about as a bike path across the river.
Mr. Chair, the one thing Moorhead doesn't have is any money. They might have lots of desires, but they don't have any money. That's the bottom line. Just from our past experience with all the bridges, we're the ones who pay. We're the ones who maintain them because they don't have money. That's the bottom line. So I actually, especially with the diversion, we'd love their participation, but so far it's zero.
Well, it's not exactly zero. They put some in it. No, they have. Any other comments? Good discussion, good presentations. Thank you.
My final comment was, I think we got a good team working on this. I think we're making some good headway. I think we're almost to an aha moment, so we'll be back in front of you in the next couple months for greater direction.
Jeremy, my only disappointment was you didn't show us a picture of one of the largest fish you've ever caught off your rainy lake, but
Hey, I got twin 9-year-olds. There's not a lot of fishing in my life these days.